Thanks so much for joining today. If you have not come across me before, my name's Sally McAdams. I coordinate Climate Emergency Australia, and I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But before we get underway, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining today from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, who are the traditional owners of Naarm, where I live and work, and where I'm coming from today. And I'd also like to acknowledge that everywhere on this continent, we're all joining from unceded Aboriginal land. And I'd like to thank and acknowledge the elders of all First Nations around this continent who have been looking after this country since the Dreamtime. As I mentioned, I coordinate Climate Emergency Australia, and we're a network of councils that have declared a climate emergency all around the country. You can connect with us in a number of ways. I'll show you a little bit more about that later, but I'll just foreshadow, in case you're not on our base camp, that's a really great way to connect with lots of councils around the country. If you're just joining, I'll just mention again that we're recording. And I'll now introduce Isaac. Now, Isaac Bevor is from Climate Emergency UK, a little bit different to Climate Emergency Australia, which you'll probably pick up on as we go. So Isaac is the Partnerships Director of Climate Emergency UK, and he spent the last 5 years actively campaigning and working on local government climate policy, starting in Metro Vancouver. And at Climate Emergency UK, he's helped to write the Climate Action Plan checklist. He's developed the Climate Action Plan Explorer, and he was part of the team that created the Climate Action Plan scorecards and the Council Climate Action scorecards, which is what we're going to be talking about mostly today. So that was the first ever assessment of UK Council climate plans and action. So Isaac is going to be joining us live just slightly after 5 o'clock, because it's quite early in the morning for him. But he's kindly recorded a presentation for us. So we're going to watch that all together first. And as I switch my sharing to the video, I'm just going to ask people to give me a thumbs up just to make sure that that you can hear and see everything. So let's stop sharing there, and we're going to start again. Dokies. All right. I can see we just got a few more people coming in. If anybody would be able to leave their video on or give me a thumbs up to tell me that you can see and hear, that would be great. Occasionally we have different people have different experiences with the audio, so just let me know if this is coming through loud and clear.
Hello, Australia. I've always wanted to welcome myself to a session like that, because
yeah, but you've got your hand up. Is that because you can't hear or because you can?
Sorry, that was my fault. I meant to do a thumbs up.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eva. All right, we'll keep going.
It makes me feel slightly like I'm a pop star with fans across the world. Obviously, I'm not. I'm Isaac Bevor from Climate Emergency UK. Thank you so much for having me today to speak to you. It's a real privilege to talk about the scorecards and our work, but also to speak to you today. Obviously, this is a recording, and I'll be joining later for the Q&A around 8 AM UK time. I'm actually not sure what time that will be in Australia, but it'll be great to actually join you online and to be able to answer your questions. Obviously, today I'm here to talk about the Council Climate Action Scorecards, which is the only UK-wide assessment of Council climate action. The scorecards have come in 2 iterations since it's been going. The first iteration was actually the Council Climate Plan scorecards, which, as the name suggests, we read and assessed all UK Council climate plans. And then the second is the action scorecards came about first and were released in October 2023. And we're in the process of releasing the second version.
Sally, when you mute yourself, then his volume goes off.
Sorry, folks, I'll go back a little bit. Gotten that little trick.
So not sharing your screen anymore, Sally?
Oh, sorry. Okay, let me just unshare and reshare again. Okay.
I think you might have shared without sound this time, unless
Oh,
other people
golly.
can hear it and I can't hear it.
So sorry.
No, you're fine.
Third time's the charm.
When you're online and to be able to answer your questions. Obviously, today I'm here to talk about the Council Climate Action Scorecards, which is the only UK-wide assessment of Council climate action. The scorecards have come in 2 iterations since it's been going. The first iteration was actually the Council Climate Plan scorecards, which, as the name suggests, we rate and assessed all UK Council climate plans. And then the second is the action scorecards came about first and were released in October 2023. And we're in the process of releasing the second version of the action scorecards which will come out in June 2025. So just a little bit about the project and about Climate UK first. So the kind of key questions for the scorecards were, how do we build high quality data on climate progress at the local level? And then how do we use that data to actually drive more progress? And that's kind of the framing of the scorecards and the kind of problem that we're trying to resolve through the scorecard project. And obviously, just from Climate UK, why do we exist? Well, we exist to equip the council climate movement with the information and guidance needed to accelerate local campaigns and place-based climate action. We really do believe that local authorities know their communities best. They know their area really well, and they're going to be able to actually help our communities transition and thrive into kind of the net zero communities that we need to create. But we also understand that local communities will play a really crucial role in that transition, and also pushing their councils to go further and faster. We kind of have this recipe for success. Obviously, the scorecards is a data project at its heart, but at the same time, it's trying to make sure that there's further public accountability. And we believe that having better data and having more public accountability is what leads to more local climate, more council climate action. And you can't have one without the other. You know, you need to have that public accountability to make sure that councils and communities are there pushing and going as fast as they can to reach net zero. Just a little bit about the objectives of the scorecards. So obviously we score every UK council on their climate action. We have 2 main audiences. Obviously, that's councils themselves. So that's officers and councillors, both councillors that we would call backbench councillors. So councillors that aren't part of the governing party or coalition. And then councillors that are kind of in power. So whether that's the climate lead or portfolio holder within the council, or whether that's, you know, the council leader and the governing party. And then obviously we have campaigners, which by that we mean local residents who want to see their council taking more climate action. And for both of them, they have similar objectives of the scorecards. We hope that councils use the scorecard to improve their current climate action plans and to implement effective policies. And we've got case studies of councils doing that, of implementing more action. We've got, and then we hope local residents use the scorecards to lobby for specific and targeted policy improvements by using the scorecards as the basis to do that. And obviously winning local changes and pushing their council to go further and faster to reduce their emissions. And the kind of main objective of the scorecards is to see the reduction in emissions that are within the council's influence. So there was a very important report that came out from the Climate Change Committee, the UK Climate Change Committee, that said that local authorities have influence and power over around 1/3 of emissions within the council's area. And I'm talking the wider district of the council. And obviously Climate UK, we play a role within this. We obviously score every UK council on their climate action, and we promote the scorecard results, making sure that both councils and local residents know about the scorecards. And obviously then we turn around to the national government, and the UK is a very centralised country, and we demand more support for council climate action from the national government as well. Our scorecards methodology. So one of the things that I think is really special about the scorecards is that we don't just talk about kind of the high emitting areas like transport and buildings and heatings, but we also look at how is the council embedding climate within their governance structures? How are they collaborating and communicating with their local residents or schools or businesses within their area? You know, what are the actions they're taking to reduce emissions in waste, or, you know, in their planning policies as well? And how do we create the scorecards? How do we go about creating that methodology? So we have a key partner who is My Society. My Society are the democracy tools experts, and they, if you've ever looked at UK politics, you may have used some of their websites, like They Work For You, or What Do They Know, which is the freedom of information request tool. We had a scorecards governance. We had a group, an advisory group that represented the council climate sector. So it had some councillors on it, some climate officers, some kind of residents who are part of campaign groups, as well as sector organisations. So that advisory group oversaw the process of the scorecards, and they oversaw the creation of every question as well. As part of that methodology creation, we did a lot of sector and individual. We did a lot of sector consultations, so that included sector roundtables where we invited councils, both councillors and officers, to give feedback, as well as obviously then the other side of the sector, which is the campaigners, the local residents, local and experts who in particular areas to give feedback on the questions. And we also spoke to around 90 individuals or organisations that had particular emphasis. So, for example, we spoke to the Town and Country Planning Association on the planning policies around climate. We spoke to 20 is Plenty, who obviously look at the impact and influence of 20 miles an hour speed limits within council areas. So in terms of the scorecards creation ourselves, what do we do? So it's really important to emphasize here that the scorecards are a citizen data project, and it's really exciting that that is the case, because what we do is we get around 200 volunteers actually come forward and offer and go through and mark and assess councils on their climate action, which isn't the sexiest of topics or volunteering to get involved in the climate world. So and then we move on in terms of the we send out and process almost 4,000 freedom information requests. That's what FOI is, freedom information requests, that we send to councils, and that's roughly about 10 FOIs per council. And then we have the right of reply, and I'll talk a little bit more about the process of the scorecards in a second, but the right of reply is where councils respond and they're able to challenge and provide any further information or data. And we actually had 76% of UK councils actually respond and engage in the right of reply, which, having 3/4 of councils actually get involved and engage in the project is really encouraging to us, but also shows that councils find the scorecards valuable as well. How are the questions scored? I won't go into the structure of UK local government because it is confusing, but we have 5 different council types, and the important thing to remember is that our methodology and the number of questions that we ask varies slightly by the different type of council that we have in the UK, and that's because the different types of council have different types of powers. We have 3 types of data sets. So the volunteer research, that's something that I just mentioned about how volunteers mark about 2/3 of our questions, and that's almost like a big crowdfunder of the information. We then have national data. That is data that marks that comes from either the national government or data that comes from campaign organisations that already compile the data for the specific ask. So, for example, Divest UK already compile the data on which councils have divested their pension fund from fossil fuels, and so we just use their data rather than trying to go to create the process again. And then freedom of information requests, as I said, we have about 10 questions within the scorecards that are answered by freedom of information requests. We made sure to keep the number of freedom of information requests as low as possible, and because we know that it takes up time from councils. But we also thought that the freedom of information requests were for questions that we thought the information wouldn't be publicly available, and obviously information that we thought was really relevant. So for example, around council staffing levels, like how many climate officers do you have, or how many people do you have working on the climate plan. We had 3 types of questions, kind of the standard yes, no questions, tiered questions. So, you know, is your council fleet 10% electric, 20% electric, etc. And then penalty mark questions. So they're negatively scored questions if the council is doing something that would increase emissions, such as, you know, building or expanding new roads or airports, or owning investments in fossil fuel infrastructure, or, you know, approving oil or gas exploration. So they're the negatively marked questions. We also have 3 different types of weighting depending on the impact of the question. So there's low, medium and high. So this is the action scorecards timeline for the 2025 scorecards. We obviously did a methodology review, and we did sector consultations, kind of tying in the fact that we think sector consultation is really important. So we did that in between January and April in 2024. We then published our updated methodology for the 2025 scorecards in May. And then we have this 3-stage process, some of the stages that I've already alluded to. We have the first mark, where we have over 200 volunteers get involved. And you can think of the first mark as a big crowdfunder of all the information that we want to find on councils and their climate action. We then have the right of reply period, and the right of reply period, as I mentioned, is where councils can get involved and engage with the project, and they can review the first mark, they can flag any issues with the first mark or any information that we've missed, or they can challenge any of the first mark if they think that some of our volunteers have misunderstood some of the information from the council. And as I said, 76% of UK councils actually engaged in that right of reply period. And then we have the scoring audit. And the scoring audit is a really crucial process. This is where we actually award the marks for the 2020, where we actually award the marks for the scorecards. So the scoring audit, we invite volunteers from the first mark to get back involved. So they're already experienced, they're already trained, and we retrain them and work with them much more closely to make sure that we are trying to make sure the results are as consistent and as accurate as possible. And for the first time, because of funding allowing, we actually employed a paid auditor for every single section, who took on a much higher number of councils. And again, the reason we took on a paid auditor for every section was because to ensure accuracy and consistency of results. It also reduced the number of volunteers we were working with in the audit, which was already a much smaller team as well. And we were actually really happy to also do this, because it provided opportunities for a lot of people actually looking for their first paid work within the climate sector, which is another kind of secondary impact of the scorecards as well. So as well as training all these volunteers who then you know, are much more engaged and interested in council climate action, we've actually been able to offer those paid opportunities as well. And then we're moving on to the June launch of the scorecards. So the scorecards will be coming out in a couple of months, the 2025 timeline for the 2025 scorecards. The results from 2023. So obviously this is looking slightly backward now in terms of when we released the scorecards in October 2023. Some of the headlines were only 41 UK councils scored over 50%, but some councils were able to score over 80% in the majority of sections. There was only one section which didn't have a council that scored over 80%. And the reason why we think that's important is because it does show that there are councils which are taking action in each of the different sections of the methodology. So, you know, there were councils that scored over 90% in planning and, you know, in transport. But it also demonstrates that there's a lot of councils that need to catch up, and a lot of councils need to improve their climate action across the whole area of the council. So while there, you know, 1 or 2 councils were really good in planning, they may not have been as good in their governance structures around climate. And we kind of saw that where certain councils have prioritised taking action in certain areas, say, for example, like their local plan, which holds all the planning policies for development in the area. And that's because they'd focused on that because their local plan was coming up for review and they wanted to get they wanted to embed climate within it, but that then meant that they weren't focusing on other areas that we were marking and assessing, such as, you know, retrofitting of buildings or etc., because they're putting their focus so much into this area. And I'll talk a little bit more about what hampers council climate action in the UK a little bit later. But just in terms of the average score, so you've got the 5 different lists, the 5 different types of councils as we apply it. Single tier councils, by the way, include Scottish and Welsh councils, just in case someone wanted to ask that question later. You can see the range here. The top scoring councils were in the low to mid 60% of the scorecards, and then the lowest scoring councils were around 10%. So it does show that there's a really wide range of results, but the average score was around 30% for all of the kind of different council types. In terms of nations, Scotland scored slightly higher on average than the other nations, and in terms of regions, London was the highest scoring region in England. We then moved on to, we kind of had these recommendations of 15 ways to improve council climate action. We thought these were some of the kind of key wins or quick wins from the scorecards. So, you know, making sure information is easily accessible. One of the things that the plan scorecards and the action scorecards has seen improvement of is council websites, so that residents, councillors and even officers can understand what their council is doing more of by making the information more accessible and more publicly making the information more publicly accessible and easier to find. Carbon literacy training or climate awareness training for all staff and councillors. You know, supporting community energy or a buy-in scheme, you know, where you offer residents the ability to, through things like solar streets, where you allow residents to buy solar installations through an auction, and so therefore the installer has a greater incentive to have a lower price because there's more installations happening in the area. There's much more information of those kind of schemes online rather than listening to me slightly fumble it. You have you know, making sure action plans have smart targets. We saw that was one of the key things that came out of the plan scorecards, that a lot of action plans mentioned kind of some of the action they didn't take. It didn't mention when they were going to take it, though. It didn't mention who was overseeing it. It didn't mention any funding or how much the council thought it would cost, or when they were going to obviously deliver the projects. You know, making sure that your decision making embeds climate within it. You know, transitioning the electric vehicle fleet, that's a really important but easy win for councils. Making sure residents and stakeholders are involved and part of that transition. Councils using renewable energy on their own buildings. One of the things that we think that, you know, is something that will save the council money over the long term, but will actually and will reduce emissions. But we're not seeing enough councils doing that within their council buildings. Introducing car sharing schemes as a way to reduce emissions from residents transport, sorry. Introducing planning policies on net zero homes. This is maybe a much more difficult policy, but councils in the UK have the ability to introduce net zero building policies for new development. Introducing a life cycle assessment for new developments, so that's where for new developments, making sure that the developer is taking into account the whole life cycle of emissions, from the actual building of the development to the operation of the development to the then, you know, in a few decades time, the potential demolition of that development or, you know, retrofitting of it. Banning single-use plastics, that's actually now happened to a large extent in the UK because of national legislation. Vegetarian school meals, that's actually one of the things where councils can maybe have a much bigger, softer impact. It doesn't only reduce emissions from their catering services within schools, but also educates children that having vegetarian food is normal. Stopping the use of pesticides, so that's across the council area, and then mowing less as part of the, you know, in the UK we have a bit of an obsession with mowing grass, so until it's until it has no biodiversity. It's really bad for biodiversity, and so mowing less is a really simple way for councils to actually encourage biodiversity within their area. In terms of the scorecard's impact, users of the website is one of the things that we track. We had almost 30,000 people use the scorecards in the first week, and since launch it's over 170,000 people. We have 30% of councils actually referencing the scorecards in their reports at council meetings or in press releases. We have dozens of campaign groups having reported using it, and we've trained over 500 residents by partnering with different organisations who have groups like Friends of the Earth, who have local groups, or Hope for the Future. We have had over 200 media pieces for the scorecards launch, including one exclusive in the Financial Times. We're also on regional TV in Northern Ireland and regional radio as well. And we've been referenced by the Skidmore report. So that's a now former government minister who wrote reports on how to improve local climate action, the Wales Future Generations Commission, and previously the Climate Change Committee as well. This is one of the things that we really want to see councils doing it, and we have, if you can see down here, the link on our website, climatemercy.uk/case studies. From South Cambridgeshire, a district council told us that once CEUK highlighted this gap around training in the scorecards, we were able to make this case to senior colleagues about the need for and value in investing in climate change training. And the training programme has now been massively expanded and has helped to embed an understanding of climate through the organisation and helped to stimulate further climate action as well. What did we do with the scorecards data? Well, as well as promoting it, we actually looked at the trends that the scorecards data showed, and we released our scorecard successes report in exactly just over 1 year ago in March 2024 at our conference, Scorecard Successes. And this is, I think, something that'd be really interesting for the people in the room today. So obviously there were some, the trends that we looked at if a council had implemented a certain action, how did that then affect the difference in their overall score in the scorecards? And some of those are pretty obvious, having political leadership, a portfolio holder, that's like a council climate lead, a councillor for climate, for example, or councillor for sustainability and environment might be the title. Having access to funding, obviously, one of the key things is that local governments need to have the funding available to actually implement these projects. And one of the problems we've had in the UK is there has been a decade of austerity where local authority budgets have been cut, and that's one of the key things that actually limits council climate action, is the fact that a lot of their money is being spent on adult and child social care, and there's just not the budgets around to actually implement some of these projects. Having a climate action plan, having ambitious targets also enable more climate action as well. And one of the things I just want to highlight here is, we look at things like in their governance about, have you embedded climate within your corporate risk register? Not creating a climate risk register saying, these are the risks to the area, but in your corporate risk register, have you got climate there and the risks to council services and the community? And we think that's one of the key ways where councils can embed climate within their governance structures. And you can see the different areas where councils had taken more climate action, or that had a higher score in the scorecards due to the action that they're taken. Interestingly, being a cross-party, a council with cross-party, more than one party within the governing coalition, actually reduced the scorecard score. So I'm coming towards the end of the presentation. Just a quick drink of water. One of the things that we're pushing for from the government to support council climate action is the fact that we would like a legal duty to act on climate, so a climate statutory duty. And we believe that would improve local climate governance and reporting. So there is a legal duty to act on climate for Scottish councils, and there has been since 2009. There was a legal duty for English councils to act on climate from between 2008 and 2010, and that was removed by the coalition government, and we lost a decade of climate action because of that. Just as a clear example, all Scottish councils report on their emissions, and all of them report on their council climate action because it's part of their legal duty to do that. Only about 60% of English councils actually report on their their climate action and their emissions as well. And we believe one of the key impacts would be a legal duty would improve that local climate governance and reporting. And then just to say, we also produce these top line infographics for every section as well, not just the governance, but also the planning. So as you can see here, currently only 14% of planning authorities have set net zero standards for building new housing at this point in time, even though we know that every house receiving planning application is not going to be built for a few years and is going to last for decades. So we need to see more councils implementing net zero standards to build new housing. We've also seen 11 mineral planning authorities have actually improved new or the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure in the UK, which is a real shame. A lot of that has since been quashed because of the Finch case from the Supreme Court in the UK. But that's, councils are not only taking climate action that reduce emissions, there is the case that councils are taking action which will actually increase emissions further. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the Council Climate Action Scorecards. Hopefully I've arrived in the room and in the meeting and can answer any questions that you have. But thank you once again for having me. If you do need to reach out, my email is on screen, but also I'm sure will be shared with participants after this session. Thank you.
Okay. Hopefully everybody was able to see and hear all of that. Now, I think we have a few minutes before Isaac arrives. I'm just going to check though. Isaac, if you are here, call out, but otherwise I might just invite you all to have a think, and as you process all of that, if you do have a question that you'd like to ask, either feel free to pop it in the chat or you can put your hands up and we'll just have those ready for Isaac. And see there are a few things in the chat already. There is Isaac right on time. Welcome, Isaac. Good morning.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I hope I'm not too late or anything.
You're not late at all. We've just finished listening to your recording, so thank you so much for doing that for us.
No worries.
Yeah, so really, really interesting to hear about the experience in the UK. And I've invited people to put some questions in the chat and pop their hands up as well. But in the meantime, while people are sort of getting over their shyness, I've got a few questions. But did you want to start off with anything, just any further introductions or anything you wanted to kick off with before we have some questions?
I guess just one update is that there is quite a strong campaign at the moment between ourselves, and others in the kind of local climate government movement, and the people in the nature movement like Wildlife and Countryside Link, which is a big UK national nature organisation, who are pushing for improved. If they're pushing for a climate statutory duty for councils, and then also improved nature duties for nature action as well. Yeah, that's just like an interesting update that's been happening at the moment in the last a few months, and there's like amendments are being laid to bills in Parliament that are coming forward, and there's generally a bit more openness from this government on the idea of a statutory duty, which is interesting because there is this is the one complication in the UK. There is one local authority in England which has a statutory duty on climate, which is the Greater London Authority. So the Mayor of London has a duty to act on climate, and no other English authority does. Which is a weird system to have.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess we're lucky that in most states in Australia we do have, if not super specific climate legislation, we do have applicable legislation that describes at least some responsibilities for local government.
Yeah.
We've got some questions popping up. I might go to them first, and then I might go to some of the questions that I've got from delving into your report.
Yeah, of course.
So Suzanne asked, she said, I thought there were reporting powers under the UK Climate Act. Do these not apply to local government, or have they just not been utilised?
So yeah, there's reporting for the national government under the UK Climate Act, but from my understanding, they don't apply to local government. It was the national government at the time did introduce 3 kind of indicators which local for climate, and there was one on climate mitigation, so they had to reduce their own emissions for a council. There was another one around reducing emissions from their area, which was tied to per capita, so they had to reduce per capita the emissions from the area, I think. And the other one was actually on adaptation, which was really good. And those indicators would have had to be reported on between 2008 and 2010, and loads of councils in the UK suddenly had climate teams. And then in 2010, we had a change of government, and the coalition government, in their bonfire of regulations, as they call it, removed basically all of the indicators on climate and other indicators as well. And other duties on local authorities, and then imposed massive cuts to budgets over the next 10 years. And of course, the first thing to go were those things that weren't duties. And so we effectively lost a decade of climate action. And it wouldn't have been, it wouldn't have been some of the schemes that we're seeing now, because there's definitely more urgency from councils. But what would have happened is there would have been, lots more like leisure centres, and their own buildings would have had solar panels or would have been retrofitted. And so all of those kind of the simpler, lower hanging fruit probably would have been taken care of. And also councils would have built up that capacity of knowing how to do those projects. And therefore, when it came to trying to, help residents retrofit their homes, or much like larger scale projects to reduce emissions, there would have been, so much more experience and capacity of councils knowing what to do. Whereas from 2018 onwards, it's kind of been like an all hands to deck, but lots of councils have been turning around like, I'm not sure what we can do, what should we do, which has made us useful as an organisation to people, but we would rather not be in the position where 400 authorities across the UK are suddenly trying to work out what they should be doing, on the greatest emergency we're facing. So yeah.
And Isaac, that possibly provides an answer to the question I was about to ask you next, which was, you mentioned that the scores overall seem to be sort of on the low side, like people were generally around the 30% mark. And I'm curious what you put that down to. Is it the 10 years of lost action, or is it that's simply what the gap is between what's needed and what councils are currently doing, or is it something else?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting question. I think partly it's down to the fact that there was just a lack of experience and expertise, and genuinely like that, most councils have only got their climate teams in place in the last 5 years, to be honest. Like the majority, since they declared climate emergencies, were like, we should do something about this. So and I think there's then been quite a change in how you then embed it through the organisation. So lots of climate officers would be coming into like their positions, and a lot of climate officers will come from kind of specific backgrounds, and maybe there's not many people that are kind of climate based. They would have come from either being biodiversity based, and it might be the same in Australia as well, but they would have come from a transport background or a buildings background, and therefore had some understanding of building regulations or transport decarbonisation and what they should do to reduce emissions across the area. But suddenly they're brought into a world, and their planning teams, they're going, oh, so what should we do on climate then? And Jen, you've had these conversations with officers, and the climate officers like, I don't know, like I don't come from a planning background, like what is the best thing? And so there's that lack of understanding of what councils should be doing in each area across like what they should be doing in each of their functions and services to reduce emissions outside of the really obvious stuff of we should have electric vehicles. And I think that's where the scorecards are really helpful and provide some of that guidance to councils, because we kind of show some of the best practice in the different areas and functions. So that lack of expertise for sure. And then, you know, budget cuts is the thing that's always mentioned about how they just don't have the money to be able to do things. In the UK, councils don't have the powers to raise taxes really, and even if they want to do something simple like a landlord licensing fee, which is where a landlord will have to pay a license, and then some councils have taken that to enforce better standards in the rental sector, which means, like, you know, usually a reduction in emissions because they're enforcing high efficiency or standards for residents within that sector. They have to get that approved by the national government. So they'd have to get sign off by the Secretary of State for anything like this kind of outside of their powers, which adds a massive delay. And also, you know, councils are just like, oh, I'm not sure we want to go through that process. So there's that. And then the fact that the UK government, outside of the kind of block grant to councils, which is mostly spent on adult social care and child social care, all of the funding is competitive and short term. So it's like, here is your grant to decarbonize your buildings, and so loads of councils applying to these, I think dozens of funding pots for dozens of different things to reduce emissions. And lots of the smaller authorities just don't have the capacity to be like, I'm going to apply to, you know, 30 to 40 funding pots for all this different stuff, and so they just don't get the money. And you have the kind of ridiculous position of, say, Manchester, who have done really good work on, say, retrofitting their council homes, and so lots of them are quite energy efficient, and you know, over 90% are a really decent level of energy efficiency. And then about 30 miles down the road, you've got Mansfield District Council, where only 5% were at a decent energy efficiency level, and 95% weren't. And that's partly because Mansfield just didn't get any money from the government to take any action. And I know the government's funding money towards like areas where they'll have the biggest impact. So Manchester could say, we'll retrofit 5,000 homes because we have a team to be able to do it, and therefore, you know, 5,000 is better than that. But then you just have this disparity across the country where some councils will be able to take good action, partly because they're winning these competitive funding bids, and other councils just can't, and so they just have to sit there and wait. And it's ridiculous. Like, even electric buses work exactly the same. We want everywhere to have electric buses, but we have a competitive funding pot that just basically you have to wait your turn until you get it, and then suddenly you're allowed to order 200 electric buses because you've won the funding, which is just a ridiculous way to run a country, in my opinion. But yeah, so I think
really,
those are some of the examples.
Yeah, really interesting to hear the funding differences. I think one of the things that you mentioned in your report that I think a lot of people would be interested to hear more about is this community municipal investment idea, or CMI. So I would say in Australia, there are a few councils who have looked into the idea of climate bonds or green bonds. Maybe somebody in the chat knows of a council who's actually pursued that, but I don't know of any council that's sort of pursued that through to actually operationalizing it. So I'm keen to hear a little bit more about that, and if you've got any examples you can share or how that works.
Yeah, one from Bristol that just launched one the other day, and I'll get the text up for the organisation who runs it, or who runs a lot of them. Yeah, it's an interesting situation. I think it's Abundance Investment who run it. There's one council which has done multiple fundraising and like community bonds. the schemes don't raise life-changing amounts of money from a council basis. I think the highest that's been raised is between 3 and 5 million, which is like a decent amount, but in the area of decarbonisation, that probably means you're going to be able to say decarbonise like a few of your leisure centres or something. I think for me, where it has the biggest impact, and that might be really useful for, just to say that money raised might be really useful for an authority that's a little bit smaller, or is a little bit, you know, and therefore, you know, actually like £1 million for a small authority is actually going to make quite a big difference. No problem. If you have to go, that's fine. But the real impact is that like it makes residents interested and engaged in the in what is happening in the area, and so you know, they have stats on how many residents from the local area actually invest in these kind of bonds. And I think that's the most exciting part of this. Is it's another way to get revenue and income. It's not going to be the highest, the biggest way you can get revenue and income. That's going to come through other measures. But it is a way to get lots of people within your area engaged in the projects you're running to decarbonise. And in a sense, there's that idea that if you've got quite a lot of residents investing, like a few hundred residents or up to a few thousand residents investing in something like a climate bond, then when they walk past the project and see, you know, are those the solar panels that I help fit on the council's building, and I'm getting that bit of income back from the interest or dividend that the council pays out, then I think that's a way of really kind of engaging the community, and that's kind of the bigger benefit, or from my perspective, that I understand it. But yeah, the link on the 2 links that I put in, Bristol is the latest council to introduce one. Abundance Investment is the organisation that often helps councils to run it. And if anyone from this call wanted to contact them, they'd be happy to talk, I guess, even at a webinar like this, or, you know, just to reach out via email and hear their experiences.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Isaac. Thanks for those links. That's great. I'll just check in before I launch into more questions. If anybody would like to ask a question, please do pop your hand up or pop it in the chat. STC, I think this is Yeva, who said, do more affluent council areas tend to score higher? And she's wondering if the less affluent councils might need to prioritise other urgent community needs, which might affect their ability to invest in climate.
Yeah, it's a great question. We, in the plan scorecards, there was some analysis done by academics who looked at this, and they tended to find that the councils that scored higher in the plan scorecard, so where we rate and assess their climate action plans, there was a correlation between those councils those council areas which were more affluent, scoring higher. In the action scorecards, we did a little bit of analysis internally, and we found there wasn't really that strong a correlation between affluence. Or the way we measure it is through the index of multiple deprivation, which is how deprived different councils are rated, basically. But we are going to look at, so we didn't really find too much of a correlation for the council area, and I think that's because sometimes councils that are in areas which don't have that high affluence or are more deprived, you can really tie climate action into the co-benefits of like what you're actually helping. So, you know, like a lot of getting residents to retrofit or install renewable energy is something that can actually save costs in the long term, and therefore if you can kind of help fund it or help support it, then, you know, that's something that can actually help like save on energy costs, especially as energy costs in the UK are so high at the moment. But I would certainly say that there are different types of actions which are going to be more difficult. So, for example, in an area like Blackpool, which is a council which is one of the more deprived, one of the areas they will struggle to take action is within planning, because they have low land values and therefore the way the planning system works in the UK is with the concept of viability, which is basically the developer has to make a certain amount of profit on every scheme. Blackpool cannot really turn around and ask for higher net zero requirements because they just don't have the land values for the developer to actually make that scheme profitable if they ask for higher requirements. And that's a real shame, which means that areas like Blackpool just have lower standard of housing built than an area that's more affluent, and so therefore we just have greater disparity again and continuous because Blackpool can't introduce those high standards. What we do need is, in some areas, is just a solid national legislation, which has actually been delayed, the Future Home Standard, and that needs to come in, and that would allow councils, obviously, to enforce that national standard, and therefore just would provide a springboard so that areas that are less affluent would be able to enforce a decent standard of new homes, or a much improved standard of new homes, and reduce emissions in that way. So there is, I think, areas where councils which are less affluent are less likely to be able to take certain action, for sure. The other thing we're going to look at in these scorecards as well is the wealth of the council. Now, it's really hard to determine what is the exact wealth of a council because there's different ways to measure it, but we've got 3 indicators. Off the top of my head, I can't actually remember what the 3 indicators are, but we will look at the results of the 2025 scorecards and understand if the wealth of the council itself, so like their reserves and their income per resident, etc., level of income per resident, affects like their ability to take climate action. And obviously with the understanding that it is likely that effect is that would be a likely effect, that the wealthier council is more likely to be able to invest in some of these changes.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. One of the things that I noticed in the report, and you showed it on one of your infographics today, was that it seemed like the highest correlated factor in terms of high council ratings was whether or not a council had a dedicated climate portfolio holder.
Yeah.
And I would say in Australia, it's very common for there to be a climate portfolio holder, both at the council level and at the staff level. So I was curious, is that less common in the UK? What does that look like in a successful council?
Yeah, it is fairly common in the UK for there to be the climate lead from the councillor side. So it might be that they're like the cabinet member for climate and transport, or sustainability and something, and I don't know, they have different words that mean the same thing often, which I'm sure you'll find in Australian local government as well. But yeah, so I think it's around 80% of councils in the UK have a clear cabinet lead for climate, so that clear leadership, or committee lead. So we have 2 different systems of governance in the UK for councils. But yeah, so they're in about 80%. So it is very common that councils have it, but there's still a substantial number which don't. And yes, so there is probably similar to amount of it's probably similar to Australian local government in that sense. But we just found that even though those councils which had a climate lead and it was really clear, we found that of those roughly 15% or 20% that didn't have a climate lead, like there was quite a big disparity between the average score if you took the 80% who did have a climate portfolio holder and compared it to the 20% that didn't. There was a big disparity between the average score, which is really interesting given that the majority of councils do actually have one. Some of the main benefits that kind of the report showed for those kind of positions is that it just gives for the community, it gives a contact for like the community to reach out to. So community energy groups or people can be like, oh, who's the person that's going to be responsible for anything around this? Oh, it's the climate lead, like, and that's really obvious. But the problem of having kind of, and this is similar to having one kind of council climate staff member or one cabinet lead, is it just becomes their job. And that's the real danger of councils, and what we're trying to push back against a bit with the scorecards is it's just like, oh, climate, oh, that is the climate team's job. And in some smaller councils that is literally one person, and like it's it cannot be the case that this cross-cutting emergency is just the action is just taken by one person or one team or one cabinet member. It's really helpful to have them there so they can constantly remind and be like, oh no, we need to do something to reduce emissions. Oh, the local plan is coming forward. What can we do on climate in the planning policies? But it should be the planning team that is then, oh, okay, we have to take climate into account. What should we be doing in the planning? Oh, we need to be thinking about some of these climate risks, so we need to put it in the corporate risk register. It can't just come from the cabinet member for climate or the portfolio holder or the one climate staff member, because that's how it's just going to be delayed. You have to have, it has to be a whole council response basically, and that is, I think, where councils are struggling to change that culture when it comes to climate. We aren't always seeing councils respond across the whole of their functions and areas. Sometimes councils, for obvious reasons, are being like, actually, our local plan, which is what sets the planning policy for the next decade, is coming forward. We're going to concentrate all our energy and focus on getting that local plan really strong on climate. And you'll see them introduce a really good local like climate plan, and then but then that takes the focus away from other areas, and you can kind of understand that because there's that opportunity to do it. But the whole point is that the transport team should be looking to decarbonize. They should be looking to implement schemes, initiatives. Like the planning team should be doing it, the governance team, like everyone has to do it at a council level to be able to make this effective. And one of the dangers of having a portfolio holder and one kind of climate staff member who is the danger is that it just becomes their job, and you have to push back against that effectively. I don't know if that's something that is experienced that's happened in Australian local government as well, or but I would imagine it is the case. Yeah,
that's definitely something that we talk about a lot, is how to embed climate across every part of council and how to make it part of everyone's business. Definitely a common topic of conversation, and I think it's probably a good one to leave it on since we're approaching the end of our hour. But I do just want to check in, just in case anybody's been shyly holding back their question. Does anybody have a question for Isaac before we wrap up? No? Okay. I'm going to just share my presentation again, because I just want to put a few things up on screen, and I'll also just put in the chat the link that we shared earlier about the scorecards and also Isaac's email address. But I'll just quickly.
And just to say, while you're doing that, Sally,
really
thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. Thank you for having me. It's really great to talk to people in Australia. We've seen the scorecards or similar initiative happen in Canada and everything, and it's great to just talk to you and be here. So I really appreciate the opportunity, basically.
Yeah, thank you so much, Isaac. It's been super interesting to hear about things on the other side of the world, and to kind of understand, how a similar but different organisation works. And before I sort of wrap everything up, I just wanted to really encourage people to jump on board our Basecamp if you're not already. And if you're not, you can just email me and I can add you to that. And that's where you can find all sorts of stuff, including we can put some of the resources that Isaac shared today into our project library, into resources. I'll just leave that up on screen as well for you to get in touch with us if you have not done so already. But I might just stop sharing right at the end so we can just see everybody's faces one more time. And just say, again, a really big thank you to you, Isaac, for coming today, for getting up early and for pre-recording for us. It's been really nice to make contact with you, and we'd love to hear updates as you go.
No worries at all. It's not too much of an early start. Although I was really worried that I would get the time confused, and so I did wake up a bit earlier to be like, what's that actually? I don't need to be here at 7 a.m.
No.
It's definitely 8, but yeah.
I had the exact same panic yesterday, and I double checked everything. I was like, okay, It's going to be okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, Isaac. And thanks everybody for joining today. And yeah, we look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Isaac. Thanks, Sally.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.